Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, Brunning, Bruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is a chilly Tuesday here in Colorado. We are going to be talking about the Week 14 roundup. All of us that tried to survive 6 teams on the bye and several other big names like Ken Walker and Breece Hall and George Pickens and Ladd McConkey who just couldn't suit up. So if you survived and made it into the playoffs, congratulations. We have both a redraft and a dynasty league. In the redraft league, both Dennis and I made it. Neither of us are a top seed. People's champ, which is Dwight and Andrew Tux, got the buys in our redraft league. You, I believe, are playing your wife in the first round, and I'm playing your sister-in-law.
That is correct. Yep. And my wife, I was telling her about missing Scott Fishbowl. I knew this was going to be the bad week for me, and I missed the cut line by about 17 points. I was telling her about it, and then she proceeded to text me our bracket and said, "Dang, now you're going to lose 2 leagues this week." I was like, there's my wife out here, kicking me when I'm down.
In our dynasty league, I did make the playoff field, although I will say my team feels like it faded a little bit down the stretch. You did not quite make it. Blake was the top seed. John was our second seed. Those guys got buys. Jacob O'Niner is in the playoffs. Colts 00 GT and John Weber 82 also making the playoffs. I believe I play Colts 00 GT today, which is our friend Ray, who was on over the summer. So we will give some updates. I know Dennis and I are just real excited about the redraft matchup. Going to be a tough beat in your household this week. I saw your wife already starting a little bit of the trash talk. As consolation, since you got clipped from the Scott Fishbowl, she's hoping to make it 2 in a row for you.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I'll roll with it. Let's see how it goes. I might, it might be worth it for me to throw this matchup.
Yep, we shall see. Speaking of teams, I don't know if they threw the matchup, but I think we all thought the Titans would be a little better at home. Instead, they lose 10-6 to Mac Jones and the Jaguars. Dennis, Tank Bigsby kind of leading that backfield again when he and ATN are both in. It seems like ATN more of the pass-catching back, but Bigsby really taking over on the ground, had 18 carries, only 55 yards and a touchdown, had 1 reception for 7 yards. We know they picked up ATN's 5th-year option. How do you feel about Bigsby kind of going forward in Dynasty?
He's a solid, unspectacular, kind of a grinder back. He had some good games in the middle of the season where, he was putting up some decent numbers, and then he got banged up. I like Bigsby, but I think he's headed towards being a depth guy on your fantasy roster, a 0 RB guy. And if you choose to go that strategy, somebody that you can get later that you hope might get an opportunity. I mean, he only has 8 targets in 262 snaps this season. So they don't throw him the ball. He's showed a little bit of speed. He's made a couple longer runs. But he's just kind of your quintessential grinder, and sometimes he gets to the second level and he's going to get you 20, 30, 40 yards. But he's a tough runner. This team in general is kind of in disarray. I don't know what next season is going to look like. It's likely going to be a new head coach. So will they be like, hey, I know we're stuck with ETN for another year and we got Bigsby for a couple more under contract. Will they decide, we don't need to spend much capital on running back because it's a disposable position to a lot of people? They need Trevor Lawrence to continue to get the ball to Evan Ingram and Brian Thomas. I think that makes their running game better. So they may very well invest in defense and offensive line in hopes that Trevor Lawrence can reach some sort of version of the potential we thought he had coming out of college. But ultimately, it'll come down to who is the actual coach of the Jaguars. I think expecting much more than RB3, maybe low end RB2 out of Bigsby next year is going to be, kind of where I'll be at.
Speaking of coaches potentially on the hot seat, some people talking about Brian Callahan, who is the coach of the Titans, being on the hot seat. It is his first year. The Titans weren't a great team last year, but they have certainly struggled mightily. I think one of the questions or knocks has been the inability to get much of anything out of Levis. He has started 10 games. He is 2-8, completing 63.6% of his passes, 1,827 yards, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. How do you feel about Callahan? Do you think he should get more time? Do you think he should get a new quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of down there in Tennessee trying to make chicken salad out of chicken feathers. The Levis had issues coming into the league. He tends to make poor decisions, throw some interceptions. In shorts and shells, he's got a rocket arm, but he's questionably accurate. So he's kind of saddled with a mediocre QB. They traded away Nuke Hopkins. Well, I freely admit this year that Hopkins probably would have been the second best receiver after Calvin Ridley, but their games are quite different. Nuke is a kind of a bully outside receiver, big slot receiver versus Ridley, who does a lot more with speed. But I think Hopkins has value. I think we see that in Kansas City where he went. Ridley's sitting at wide receiver 30. Nick Westbrook-Akini is at wide receiver 19 since week 6. He had a poor game this week, but I think Ridley's the guy they like most to be their top dog. Tony Pollard has looked good, 21 carries for 102 yards this season. I think Pollard actually has had a much bigger share of the running back split than I had expected. And part of it has been that Tyjae Spears has spent a lot of the season dinged up and missed some time. But, I don't think the Titans aren't great, but I don't think he's not a David Culley. Who was the San Fran guy that went?
It was Ben something, I thought.
No, I don't think it was Ben. But anyways, he's not one of those guys that get booted after a season.
Next up, the Jets travel to Miami, and the Dolphins get the 32-26 overtime victory. Breece Hall, suffering with a knee injury, was held out of this one. So we got the all-rookie backfield of Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis for the second week in a row. Isaiah Davis putting up a touchdown, saw 10 carries for 40 yards. Only one fewer than Allen, saw 6 targets, got 3 for 27. How do you feel about Davis for Dynasty?
I think for Dynasty, he's the third best back on the Jets. I don't think either Davis or Allen are as good as Breece Hall, but Breece is going to need to stay healthy. I was frankly surprised at such an even split. Will it be that going forward? I think it'll come down to, does Allen, when he gets his shot, is he able to put up some good numbers to warrant them not splitting it so evenly with Davis? They're kind of the same back, to be fair. Davis is a little slower than Braylon Allen, and he played at a much lower competition level at North Dakota State. But, he put up really good numbers in college. So did Braylon Allen at Wisconsin. So it gives me a little bit of pause that I'm probably right now more comfortable starting Allen as a low end flex and sitting Davis. But if I see another week of them getting each 10 to 12 carries, 4 to 6 targets, and it's a pretty even split, then I think you might be able to make the case that they're both low end flexes on a consistent basis.
Meanwhile, Devon Achane seems to have really seized the backfield in Miami. He has stayed healthy this year. He has appeared in all 13 games, 153 carries so far for 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. He has obviously seen that explosive yards per carry drop. He has 50 more carries so far this year, 200 fewer yards, and 4 fewer touchdowns, but he has really exploded as a receiver. 71 targets, has caught 63 for 474 and another 6 touchdowns. How are you feeling about him kind of long-term for Miami?
I have mixed emotions. I really do, because I'm team big wide receiver, bigger running backs. I don't necessarily like to rely on a kind of scat back size receiving back as my RB1. But Achane has stayed healthy. He athletically and physically is very similar to Warrick Dunn, the former Tampa Bay Buccaneer / Atlanta Falcon. Now, if he can stay healthy, like Dunn stayed healthy, then he could be, not only is he a high-end RB1 for fantasy, he could push for the RB1 in any given season just based on his ability to command targets out of the backfield and his explosiveness running the ball. I mean, Warrick Dunn he played, 12 years. He rushed for almost 11,000 yards and caught over 500 passes. So it was like he was a monster at 5'9" and 176 pounds. And I think Achane's 5'8" and 184 pounds or 83 pounds. So they're very similar. Both of them ran in the 4.3s at the combine. Dunn didn't run at the combine, but he was hand timed at a pro day at 4.28. So I'll give him the 4.3s. But they're very similar in what they bring to the table. It'll come down to whether or not Achane can spend most of his career being healthy. And if that's the case, he could regularly be 1,100 yard rusher and catch 50 passes.
Next up, the Atlanta Falcons traveled to Minnesota. It was not a kind return for Kirk Cousins. The Vikings getting the 42-21 victory. Dennis, what do you think the Falcons do for quarterback in 2025? They obviously signed Cousins to a large deal, but then they took Michael Penix. Cousins so far has struggled a little bit. 13 games, he has started them all, but they are 6-7. 67% completion percentage, not terrible. 3,396 yards so far and 17 touchdowns, not terrible, but he has already set a career high at 15 interceptions. The last 4 games, he has 8 interceptions and no touchdowns, and the Falcons seemingly spiraling a little bit. Do you think that they will look to maybe make a change? Do you think this is a hiccup?
It's so Cousins came into the league expected, the league expected him to be a career backup. He was a 4th round pick, and he was expected to back up Robert Griffin, and he blossomed. Griffin got injured. Cousins blossomed. We had the "You Like This" moment that went viral, and he ground out a career at a very high level. He's 36 years old now, I think. 36, turned 36 in August. I mean, one of two things could happen. He's either entering the Aaron Rodgers phase of his career, where he feels like he's earned the right to just be like, I'm the starter, don't question it, no matter how bad it gets. Or he's entering the Joe Flacco phase of his career, where it's like, I'm going to collect this paycheck, but I'm going to be ready. And at any given season, if the guy ahead of me gets injured, I'm going to give you 6, 8, 10 games, that you're going to be like, wow, this guy can still play. And then the next year it'll be like, oh, fizzle, fizzle. I don't know that I'll be surprised if Atlanta goes to Penix next year. Penix started 55 or played 48 games in college and started the majority of them. He's a little bit older as a prospect. He did play 6 years in college due to injuries. He had, I think he had 3 season-ending injuries in his college career. But his last 2 seasons at Washington were phenomenal. He was a passing machine, put up lots of yards and touchdowns. You may be able to attribute some of that to, Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan, I think is who he had. And I forget.
He had Polk too, and McMillan.
Polk and McMillan.
And Odunze. All 3 of them were on Washington.
Yeah. I knew there were 3 of them. I wasn't sure if one of them was at Oregon. Anyways.
Troy Franklin was the Oregon dude.
Okay. I just think that if I roster Cousins, I'm looking for an insurance policy right now, because he could shake out of it. I mean, he had he started off a little slow week 1, then he seemed to play okay for several weeks. And now in the last 4 weeks, 0 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. You knew Minnesota was going to give him all they could. They had Brian Flores at the defensive coordinator, and the last thing they wanted to do was have him come back and beat them. So they were going to do everything they could. I don't think anybody expected it to be on the back of 5 Sam Darnold touchdown passes, but hey.
Speaking of which, we saw another big game from Jordan Addison. We know Justin Jefferson is there, and he's been great, but Addison, year 2, 11 games so far, 68 targets, caught 44 for 708 yards and 7 touchdowns. How are you feeling about him in Dynasty?
I think Addison is a clear wide receiver 2 for Minnesota, which puts him at the wide receiver 2-3 with wide receiver 1 upside range. Depending on how my team is shaken out when I'm drafting next year, I may or may not want to go for Addison in the, low end wide receiver 2 range, maybe even stretch it a little to the mid. Depends on, my biggest concern with Minnesota is they spent a 1st round pick on JJ McCarthy. And if I have severe concerns that JJ McCarthy is like a game manager. He's not going to chuck it like Sam Darnold or Kirk Cousins did up there in Minnesota. I feel like there's going to be, I'm just not sure that McCarthy, not that he doesn't have the guts to do it, but I just don't know if he has the ability to do it. And so I'm a little bit concerned there. And often what we see in those cases is that it's the 2nd and 3rd wide receiver that pay the price for that. The Jefferson will still get his, but the Addison and Hawkinson, they're the receivers that are going to end up, taking a hit to their production.
And I think that was our concern coming into this year, but Sam Darnold, fortunately, throwing it all over the field, and their pass offense has remained robust, but that is certainly a possible concern. Next up, one of the just barn burner games of Week 14 saw the New Orleans Saints travel to play the New York Giants, who remain winless at home and lost 14-11. When Dennis Allen was there in New Orleans, Kendre Miller seemed to be on the outs. Seemed to be on the turd list for his coach. Dennis Allen is gone. Kendre Miller returning from IR. Got 10 carries, 32 yards, a touchdown. Not incredible numbers, but did seem to have a role. Does that get you excited that his value may not be completely erased?
He could be next season's Chuba Hubbard for all we know. You know, a guy that spent the first couple years buried, didn't get a ton of opportunity, but has a good physical profile. And you know, at this point, anything from Miller is encouraging. It'll be interesting to see what happens the rest of the way without Derek Carr, because after the big
it's weird they haven't ruled Carr. They said now he's week to week, even though he broke his hand and has a concussion.
Well,
they really don't want to see any more Jake Haener and Rattler.
You know, after the big six, Rattler was my guy to go, if I'm going to take a shot on a quarterback in this class in dynasty leagues, you know, I'll take a late shot on Spencer Rattler. And so when Carr got injured earlier and Haener was active and he went in, they didn't put Rattler in, but Rattler then with a full week of preparation was the starter, and boy, just crapped the bed. He had an awful week. Now, Rattler has some tools that Jake Haener doesn't, just a really good arm, but I think the NFL game is still moving too fast for Spencer Rattler. At least when he was playing, that was the case. But I think Kendre Miller is a guy that, like in dynasty leagues, if he's out there floating around, I'll add him on the end of my bench and see. Because as much as I like Alvin Kamara, his best seasons were always with another running back that was a banger, and Kendre Miller may very well be that guy next year.
We shall see. At least you can feel good about keeping him on your roster for a little bit longer, just because at least it doesn't look like he's totally out of it. Meanwhile, the Giants continue to be a massive dumpster fire. Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito hasn't really seemed to matter. Tyrone Tracy still getting some volume, 16 carries, but only 45 yards. The rushing touchdown, getting a couple of receptions helps. He's putting targets to Wan'Dale Robinson, Tracy, Malik Neighbors. We're not seeing incredible production. How do you feel about the Giants for fantasy as we go into the playoffs?
Well, I mean, looking at the numbers, Drew Lock is throwing the ball to the guys you want him to throw the ball to. I don't know how frequently we're going to see the Giants let Drew Lock throw the ball 49 times. But, I mean, Neighbors with 10 targets, Tracy with 10 targets, Wan'Dale with 11, Bellinger with 7. Heck, Darius Slayton had 6. It just wasn't super productive out of those targets. You know, Neighbors had 79 yards. Locke didn't throw any touchdowns, so that was a bummer. It was just so when Andrew Thomas went down, what did we say? We were like, oh my God, please don't let Evan Neal play anymore. Well, they added a couple more injuries, and now they really don't have any choice but to put Evan Neal in there. And Neal is awful. He struggles pass blocking and gives up a lot of pressure to the quarterback. Coming out of college, the knock on Drew Lock, one of them was, he doesn't do great with pressure around his legs, and big arm, but gets a little squirrely. Well, all of those things have been playing out in New York, and ultimately they need to get back to where, when Tracy runs the ball 16 to 20 times, that he's able to break off, get to that 80, 90, maybe 100-yard mark. But this week wasn't awful for Tracy. If you roster him, he have 93 yards and a touchdown with 5 receptions. So if you roster Tyrone Tracy, you'll take it. But 12.9 points from Malik Neighbors. You want more yards, you want a touchdown out of him, and that just wasn't there.
Yeah, we really liked Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Roma Dunze coming out, but all of them have kind of struggled in inconsistent pass offenses, which is a bummer. Next up, the Carolina Panthers traveled to Philadelphia, and he nearly pulled off a massive upset, but the Eagles hold on for the 22-19 victory. The bad news for the Panthers, I guess it was 22-16 victory. I can't do math. Bad news for the Panthers, Jonathan Brooks goes down with a non-contact knee injury, has torn his right ACL for the second time in 13 months, finishes his rookie campaign with 9 carries for 22 yards. Took a long time for us to see him coming off of an ACL tear that he suffered last November, now tearing a same leg in December. How are you feeling about Jonathan Brooks going into 25 and beyond?
Insert not great Bob gif here. I mean, you feel bad for the kid because you know how hard he worked to make it to that level of player at Texas, and how hard he worked to rehab, get drafted, get back into the NFL. But I mean, it's the same ACL he tore last year. I would guess that he's not going to be a viable play at all in 2025, even if he makes it back some. And a lot of times you hear, when the players come back, they're like, yeah, the injured knee or the injured ankle that I had the surgery on is the stronger one, because they've tightened everything up and whatnot. But that doesn't mean stuff isn't going to tear. But I would be, if he's one of those guys now that if I can go pick him up dirt cheap as the last guy on my bench, my IR squad or a taxi squad, with the understanding that I'm probably not going to do anything with him until 2026. And then we'll see what happens. At that point, they'll be getting towards the end of Chuba Hubbard's contract. It'll be time to find out, can Brooks really do anything? Should we keep him around? And, I'm not super optimistic, but occasionally you just let one of those guys ride the pine for you for a couple seasons in Dynasty, and sometimes stuff works out and they produce for you. Maybe you're in a rebuild and you're able to put him in your lineup for a couple weeks and he does well, and you can trade him for more draft capital to somebody that's competing. Those types of scenarios.
Yeah, the good news is hopefully he'll be eligible to just ride on your IR. The bad news is, you don't have a lot of IR spots, so it takes one up. But I'm with you. You're kind of in a wait and see, because for where people took him, I saw him go as early as 103 in rookie drafts. You're not getting any value if you trade him, and you certainly can't release him at this point. So that's frustrating as it is. Probably have to sit on that one. Meanwhile, we saw Dallas Goedert out again. He's missed a fair amount of time this year. We've seen Grant Calcaterra step up and step in. He caught another touchdown on Sunday. How do you feel about him kind of as a long-term stash?
Like, he's the Nick Westbrook-Akine of tight ends, I think, is what he's starting to look like. He only had 3 targets, but he caught all 3 of them, but it was only 16 yards.
Well, Hurts only threw for 108 on like 14.
Right. It's, Philadelphia Eagles doing Philadelphia Eagles stuff. Calcaterra followed Mark Andrews at OU. He was basically stepped into that big receiving tight end role. Retired because of concussions at OU. A year and a half later, he came back and played at SMU. Goddard turns 30 at the end of the season. He's got one more year left on his contract. It feels like it's set up for Calcaterra to be the successor to Dallas Goedert. He's about 3 or 4 years younger. And he's pretty athletic. He's a good pass catcher. The Eagles don't, they're not running the 2 tight end all the time thing anymore, because they've got Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Saquon Barkley and whatnot. I think Calcaterra is a stash, but I don't know. You're going to watch. Do the Eagles re-sign Goddard? Because if they do give Goddard a 2-year extension, let's say, they're not doing it for him to back up Calcaterra. They're doing it because they believe he can continue to be their starter. But Calcaterra at this point, he's going to be fairly cheap, a little more expensive right now if you're still able to make trades in Dynasty because Goddard is out and tight end needy teams might be looking for somebody. I mean, I picked him up. We had a conversation last week about, in one of my leagues, I was asking you, do I start Chigo Okonkwo or Foster Moreau or Tyler Conklin, or do I pick Goddard up off of waivers? And, you were like, well, I've got to start Moreau in a league too. Now I like Moreau coming up, but I decided to go, I picked up Dallas Goedert and he scored a touchdown.
And Calcaterra.
Yeah, him too. He scored a touchdown for me and Calcaterra helped me win and I hold on to the number 1 seed in that league.
It's good if you can get it. Next up, the Cleveland Browns went to Pittsburgh and came up a little bit short.
Did they go?
They were there in body. They fell 27-14. Jameis Winston going to remain the starter there, even though they were officially eliminated from the playoffs. What do you think is the future for Jameis Winston?
Well, for the rest of this season, if you roster Winston, you're hoping that they stick to their words. He's QB9 since week 8, and that's a very productive quarterback. He's throwing the ball to David Njoku like, he only has eyes for David Njoku. Like 17 targets last week, 13 this week. He's turnover prone, but he's a great locker room guy. He's at that stage of his career where he's a perpetual bridge quarterback. Whereas somebody like Joe Flacco can play probably, 40-41. I don't think Winston will be able to do that because of his turnover propensity. So he won't get quite the same leeway. I think by and large, Flacco is perceived as not turning the ball over as much. But, Winston's going to be 31 January 6th. It's not like he's a spring chicken. So he's a guy that I don't mind having on my roster as my QB4 in Dynasty, just holding him there just to see what might happen. It's almost like if there were such a thing as zero QB and you're drafting a QB late, Jameis Winston is that guy you hope at some point in the season gets an opportunity to give you 3 starts. I feel like he's, depending on what Cleveland does this offseason, I could see them sticking with him for another year, letting him be a bridge quarterback for them. But I could also see him moving on to somewhere else where he feels like he may get a little better opportunity to compete.
Yeah, I feel like we've entered kind of the phase where he's going to be the backup. I don't know that anyone even sees him as their bridge starter, but I guess we will see. Meanwhile, for the Steelers, George Pickens missed the game with a hamstring injury, so that gave us a chance to see the rest of the Pittsburgh receivers. Scotty Miller coming back off of IR, I believe, had 3 for 38, 3 for 36 for Mike Williams, showing a pulse. Only 1 reception for Van Jefferson on 1 target, but you knew it was going to be for a touchdown. Probably the most disappointing if you slotted him in there. Calvin Austin saw 4 targets, but only caught 1 pass for 4 yards. What do you make of this receiving group for Pittsburgh?
Well, outside of George Pickens, it seems like Russ doesn't have the confidence to force the ball to any of them.
Would you?
I don't know. You got to give them a chance to make plays, but they did only throw the ball 26 times against a Cleveland team that they were handling fairly easily. Pickens was wide receiver 18 before missing last week, and Calvin Austin had been wide receiver. He was wide receiver 43 since week 8. So I was pretty disappointed with the production from Austin and from Darnell Washington, because Washington had been picking up a little bit of action as well. I think Freiermuth is pretty set. It's one of those games where they only threw it 26 times. So 3 targets for Freiermuth is probably about right. If they had thrown it, 10 more times, 5 targets for Freiermuth probably would have been in the range there. I don't know. Unless Mike Williams all of a sudden steps up and becomes more Studley like he was early in his career. I don't think Scotty Miller and Van Jefferson are the answers. And it just certainly seems like Calvin Austin needs George Pickens so he can be successful.
I mean, it depends. They may, you're saying they are not the answer. I guess it depends on the question you're asking. So, next up, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosted the Las Vegas Raiders, came away with the 28-13 victory that now put them back in first place in the NFC South. Dennis, Aiden O'Connell goes out. We see Desmond Ridder. He may end up being back in there next week as well. But I was interested to see Michael Mayer, the other tight end, the one that they took in the 2023 draft. 9 targets, catches 7 passes for 68 yards. He's been out a lot of this season, but that was a pretty decent showing. How are you feeling about Mayer?
I have concerns. I just think that, Michael Mayer he's a hold, but you're gonna by and large throw the ball to Brock Bowers. I don't think I expect Mayer to be relevant weekly unless Brock Bowers is injured. But there's going to be weeks like this where that's just what opens up. And, that was the case. Until week 14, his season highs were 3 targets, 2 catches, and 11 yards. And they weren't all in the same game. Those were just his actual highs for those particular stats. I like Michael Mayer. He basically got Tyler Algier. I think Mayer is a good tight end. I just think, unfortunately, they drafted somebody that's, a freak at his position. And while they'll probably end up running a lot of 12 personnel in Las Vegas now because they have Bowers and Mayer, Bowers is really going to be a slot guy. He's going to be the move tight end. He's going to be the guy that gets those jet sweeps. He's going to, be the Mark Andrews, gets more passing volume. But Mayer, he had the potential. He's got the potential and the ability to be a tight end 1. But between the quarterback situation and having Brock Bowers, he's just not going to get the volume he needs to do that.
Yeah, I almost wonder if they'd consider moving him and getting another piece, but the Raiders probably not that smart. Meanwhile, Mike Evans caught 4 passes for 69 yards, but he's sitting less than 600 yards total receiving with 4 games left to play. Could this be the year that his 1,000-yard streak comes to an end?
I mean, it sure feels like it. He needs to average 102.5 yards, which is within reach. But of the last 4 games they have, the Chargers, Dallas, Carolina, and New Orleans, the Saints give up the 5th most yards to wide receivers. The other 3 are all in the bottom half. Now, Dallas may shake up and they've had some injuries on that defense, losing DeMarvion Overshown from that linebacker / safety position. It's possible that he gets it. If he gets close, I think Baker's going to force it. not at the expense of trying to win the game, but I can see Baker being like, because Baker's a bro and he's going to want to get his guy, this number and continue it. If he hadn't missed some games, it'd be a no-brainer. He'd be in a real good spot. Can he average 103 yards the rest of the way? He can, but he's going to need to have at least one game where he goes off for 150 plus, I think, to get there.
Yeah, and we shall see. Not totally out of it. Next up, the Seahawks traveled to Arizona, got the 30-18 victory. Ken Walker missed, and Zach Charbonnet really stepped up. 22 carries, 134 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Had 7 receptions for 59 yards. We've seen him go off when Walker is out. Is he kind of just a handcuff, or could you see him getting a bigger role?
I think it's going to depend on the coaching philosophy. I feel like he's earned a bigger role, but some teams will just have this philosophy that, it's our system and, people are going to succeed. Look at San Francisco. Of course, Charbonnet is going to be good. Our system is great. Of course. So we're going to put Ken Walker back in because, he's, in our eyes, the more talented back. He was RB1 this week, and he looked phenomenal. Some of that could have been Arizona, why he looked so phenomenal. But I like Charbonnet's talent. Is he an elite back? No. He's a good back. I think he's probably – of the, so there's 32 teams. Is he, are there other teams that he would definitely be the starter on? Yeah, probably. But, so I don't know. It's so, you want to see him because he produced, but you also have seen Ken Walker produce like this too. So you just kind of riding it out. And if you roster him, I think it'd be okay to ship him off if you get a decent offer and you've got a stable of backs and can afford to move him. But he looked really, really good.
He certainly did. Meanwhile, Kyler Murray, we've talked about him being up and down. It also seems like he has struggled in big games, a couple of killer turnovers. He had some garbage time points here that makes his fantasy day better. But how are you feeling about him in Dynasty?
So I'm a noted anti-Kyler guy. And he's on pace to not break 4,000 yards again. So
you can't blame it on fall off a cliff Kingsbury here.
Yeah. So, he's getting the ball. He's targeting the guys he should. McBride 14, Harrison 8. But the ball isn't always in a great spot to catch it. He didn't rush for any touchdowns, but he threw for 2, but he threw 2 interceptions. Ultimately, he had a good fantasy game, and as a fantasy player, that's what we want. I think he's stable there for another year, but it wouldn't surprise me that, if I'm in the Kyler Murray business right now, I'm looking to get out this offseason.
Amen to that. Next up, probably the game of the week was the Los Angeles Rams hosting the Buffalo Bills. They get the 44-42 victory. This was incredible for fantasy, unless you had James Cook in your lineup. We've seen him have some big games, but lately he's been a little bit quiet. He only had 20 yards rushing, 2 receptions for 9 yards. In his last 5 games, only 271 yards on the ground, does have 4 touchdowns, has caught 14 passes. But how are we feeling about Cook?
Yeah, he's going to be fine. It was an interesting game in that the Rams got out ahead and the Bills were playing catch up for most of the game. And the Bills only ran the ball 17 times, and that included 10 times by Josh Allen. Allen had a phenomenal game. The Rams bested them by 17 minutes in time of possession. They ran 18 more plays than the Bills did. Those are the types of games that your elite quarterback has to pick the team up, put it on his shoulders, and will it to victory. And he almost did. 106 yards and a touchdown to Shakir, 95 yards to Cooper, 57 and a touchdown to Hollins, 55 and a touchdown to Ty Johnson. He ran for 82 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was a phenomenal game to watch. It wasn't as good as the Lions game, but it was still great.
Meanwhile, for the Rams, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua have just been a terrific tandem, continuing to work well together. How do you feel about those two in Dynasty?
Since week 8, Kupp is wide receiver 5 and Puka is wide receiver 8. We know what's going to happen. So they threw the ball 30 times. 22 of those targets went to Nacua and Kupp. They each scored a touchdown. They basically advertise what they're going to do, and then they do it. Kyron Williams had a great bounce back game, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns. He only caught 2 passes. As far as Dynasty, I think you're looking at, Kupp is probably worth a very late first. He's probably got 1 to 2 more years of high-level production if he stays in LA with Stafford. If he goes somewhere else or Stafford retires, I don't know what that means for either of these guys. I don't know that McVay just slots in another quarterback and runs the same exact offense. But a late first or 2 seconds for Kupp. Nacua is probably worth 2 firsts, 25 and a 26, or, maybe a couple late 25s. But Nacua is younger. Now, Nakua's got some injury issues, and he seems to be banged up all the time. But you can't deny the productivity of either guy.
Next up, we had the San Francisco 49ers hosting the Chicago Bears, and they just destroyed them 38-13. Bears, of course, coming off of a loss to the Lions. We've seen a lot of teams struggle there, but also their first game with their new head coach. Just not a real encouraging season from Caleb Williams so far. Should we be worried about him at all long term?
I don't think so. I mean, this season has kind of been a mess all around with the coaching situation. Cannon the OC and then Cannon the head coach. And it's, if I was Thomas Brown and I wanted a head coaching job, the last thing I would have done was to accept the Bears' interim coaching position, because the team just isn't set up for success. Their offensive line has struggled. Their defense has been up and down, and Caleb Williams has been up and down. So I think Caleb will be fine. He needs to get a coach in there that has the gravitas and holds the attention of the rest of the coaching staff. I think so. The biggest win for the Detroit Lions in 2023 was Ben Johnson saying, "No, I'm good. I'm staying in Detroit." And it just is a situation where that continuity and what they have going on there, Aaron Glenn staying, it was a phenomenal situation. I feel like we're going to lose both of our coordinators this year. So I hope we make it to the Super Bowl, since we've never been. But Chicago needs to kind of settle in that same way. They need to get a head coach that can captivate that team, and then they need to get an offensive coordinator that's not going anywhere for 3 or 4 years. Then Caleb Williams can develop.
Meanwhile, for the 49ers, another week, another running back injured, this time a sprain for Isaac Guerendo. His status for a Thursday night game, highly questionable. What are we doing with the 49ers backfield?
Well, breaking news, I have just signed with the 49ers as a running back practice on their practice squad. So,
They might need you.
Guerendo, I think if it was a normal week, Guerendo probably plays. Being a Thursday night game, he's probably out. Patrick Taylor, he was in Green Bay, I think, for a while. He's flashed a little bit over his career. He's not super athletic. He's got decent size. And he's going into a one-cut offense. And if he can run the play like Shanahan draws it up, he'll get yardage. As it sits right now, if Guerendo's out this week, Izzy Abanikanda looks to be the number 2. Keyshawn Vaughn, the number 3, which means we'll probably see about 8 carries from Deebo Samuel, which may be phenomenal, or it might break him again. We'll have to wait and see. I like Guerendo and what he's shown. It's going to be, they need to have their passing game clicking with Jennings and Kittle, and they need to get Pearsall going, and Deebo needs to get going in the passing game as well. He's really been, it's hard to say disappointment because they're not throwing the ball to him, so it isn't like he's dropping it, but I don't know. I think the backfield is going to be, it'll be Patrick Taylor this week. We'll see what happens after that.
I'd be curious to see if Deebo is the one they try to move this off season, because Juwan Jennings has looked very good, and they gave Ayuk that contract at Pearsall. Be curious. Sunday Night Football, the Kansas City Chiefs got a golden doink that gave them the 19-17 victory. Dennis, no J.K. Dobbins. It's been tough sledding in this backfield. Gus Edwards, 10 for 36. Does get a touchdown, which helps. Kamani Vidal, not much better, 8 for 34. What are you doing with this backfield?
Avoiding it mostly. I mean, Edwards is a touchdown-dependent, low-end flex play, and Vidal is I hope he catches 3 passes, low-end flex play. So by and large, I have more confidence in Gus Edwards getting a touchdown than I do in Kamani Vidal catching 4 passes. So if I had to play one, it would be Edwards.
Yeah, not great though. For Kansas City, they took Xavier Worthy with their number 1 overall pick. He's had kind of some moments this year. So far, 38 receptions on 67 targets, 448 yards, 4 touchdowns. How are you feeling about him in this system going forward?
He plays a specific role. He is, to me, and he's met my expectations for his rookie year. I knew he'd be a big play guy. He's going to drop some passes. I think he's a flex play with upside. Nuke is getting 1.5 more targets per game, and Rashee Rice was getting 2 more targets per game. And then you've got Travis Kelce, who's going to eat up targets. So he's, at best, he's going to be battling whatever running back they have for 3rd spot on the pecking order. And then they're going to, where he falls, they're spreading it around between Juju and Justin Watson and, Hollywood Brown if he ever gets healthy. I like what Xavier Worthy can do. I just don't think he's going to be consistent because of the role he has.
Monday Night Football saw the Cincinnati Bengals go into Dallas and get the 27-20 victory. Dennis, with Moss on IR, we've gotten to see Chase Brown as a feature back. Another solid game for him, 14 for 58, caught 6 passes for 65 and a touchdown. How do you like him in Dynasty?
Well, he's looking like a classic hashtag 2 to 3 year window running back. And, he took his opportunity and, pun intended, ran with it. Um, I think that he's solid going into next year. I don't think I don't think Herbert is a threat to his production. It feels like they may want to bring somebody else in. They're in a position where they're going to have to invest in some very high dollar players. And none of those players are going to be at the running back position. So they're going to play Brown throughout his rookie contract. They're going to replace him with another rookie that's probably a third rounder at some point. And it feels like they're going into that cycle right now. They'll try to piece the backups together with veterans like Khalil Herbert or Zach Moss. But they're looking to hit on a back like Chase Brown that has some explosiveness, can catch the ball as well as run the ball, and that they're not going to feel bad when his contract expires, letting him walk if he won't play for where they've decided his budget is.
Yeah, and Moss, I believe, signed a 2-year deal, so he should be back. Herbert is a contract here, but don't know what kind of market there's going to be for him. Meanwhile, after a couple of up and down games, we saw a pretty good performance from CeeDee Lamb Monday night, 6 for 93 and a touchdown on 7 targets. Was this an encouraging sign?
I guess, unless I'm comparing it to Jamar Chase.
Well, but I mean, Cooper Rush only completed 16 for 183, so.
I know. It's, I want to see more out of CeeDee Lamb. He is a wide receiver with an immense amount of talent, and getting him involved, he should be catching 10 passes. He should be pushing 150 yards and a couple touchdowns. He should be those not a, I get it. It's not realistic to do that every week, but that's the type of talent he brings to the field every single week. And I'd like to see more of that. Is it good? 93 yards, a touchdown. So, yeah, that was a good fantasy game. I'll take 21 points from him every single week, unless I can get 40.
I do feel like it could have been bigger, though. He had 3 for 28 and a touchdown on the opening drive, and then it felt like, as per usual, Dallas kind of just went away from him for no reason. So Thursday night football for week 15. There are no buys in week 15, but it is the first week of the playoffs, so some big games. The short week straw goes to the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. Both won last week. Both are chasing the Seattle Seahawks. The Rams are 7-6. The 49ers 6-7. Huge matchup for one of these teams to kind of stay in that playoff race. What are you expecting in this one?
So it's, we've seen that the Rams can put up points. We've seen Kyren Williams run well against the 49ers in the past. But right now, the Rams offense, they've got the 25th ranked rushing offense in the league and the 9th ranked passing offense. San Francisco's got the 2nd ranked passing defense and the 12th ranked rushing defense. So the 49ers defense would seem to be favored versus the Rams offense. Well, the 49ers passing offense and their rushing offense are 7th in both of those aspects. And the Rams passing defense is 25th, and the Rams rushing defense is 29th. So again, San Francisco would seem to have the edge when they are on offense. It'll come down to, can the Rams on both offense and defense make timely plays, whether it's getting a stop, creating a turnover, getting a big play in the passing or running game. If they can do that, I think the Rams have a chance to win. But ultimately, even with the banged up running game, I think the 49ers offense is just going to be too much. And so I'm going with the 49ers.
Oh, I see. I feel the exact opposite. I'm taking the Rams. I mean, the Rams already came back and clocked the 49ers once this year. I don't think the 49ers have enough defense for the
Well, their
three.
defense is a little decimated, but
Well, and big questions, Trent Williams obviously had an injury, but with his off the field, not sure if he'll be available to come back. Nick Bosa is still not practicing. So this feels like a year where the 49ers just, if it wasn't for bad luck, they wouldn't have any luck at all, with the injuries and some of the situation. But could be a huge game for the NFC West standings. Definitely an interesting one. That'll do it for us today. We'll be back on Friday looking at the rest of the Week 15 slate, which is probably the first week of playoffs for most of your leagues, or maybe the second week of playoffs for leagues that started a little bit early. So looking forward to that, Dennis. If people need to fill their void in their lives the rest of this week, what can they do?
I recommend cake.
It's always a solid option.
Go to your favorite podcast platform, hit that search bar, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, give us a subscribe, give us a like, leave us a rating and a review. We love that.
You can eat your cake while you listen to the podcast as well. I'm just saying. That'll do it for us today. We will see you on Friday. Until then, have a great rest of your week.